Well, one of the reasons I chose to speak at this conference is that although I'm much more of a believer in education than I am in just training, training is a really great place to start learning about the computer tutors of the future. So I think that for a lot of the really important subjects, there are, at every grade, including into the military service, there aren't enough teachers who actually know their subjects and can teach. And it's been a dream for 50 years in computing that the computer should be able to do more than just imitate media. It should be able to some extent, imitate some of the things that teachers can do. And it hasn't happened. And so whenever I get an opportunity to talk to somebody, particularly in the military, which has such large training problems, I always think there might be an opportunity to get some funding rolling to get to the next level rather than just being reactive to the technology of today. In the talk this morning, one of the points I made was that human beings are born with certain interests that they try and fill in from their surrounding culture. So we have an interest in language and communication. We love stories. We have an interest in getting back at people. So anthropologists have identified about 300 of them. And generally speaking, in traditional cultures have not employed formal schools to do them, and the learning of these things is done in something that could be recognized as something like a gaming situation. So learning how to hunt woolly mammoths and stuff, you could readily imagine making a game out of that, or fighting the neighboring tribe, and you could imagine making games out of that, or bartering and so forth. So there are a lot of situations that are completely recognizable by our nervous system and common sense culture that would fit into things like gaming and immersive simulations. Then there are these other, what I call powerful ideas that are inventions like science and deductive math and so forth, that reading and writing, that seem to require schooling of some kind, and they take a lot longer to learn, and the learning is generally not just-in-time learning. It's very hard to learn how to read in a just-in-time kind of environment because our memories don't work quite right for that. Instead, it's more of a mass immersion. It's making your way through a complicated thing, and that could describe a simulation to some extent. But generally, the thing that's lacking in most gaming for this kind of learning is, besides the needing to have a much slower pace, most game systems today can't really answer questions very well. So part of the game is to find out things there, but the things you find out are fairly simple things, and there are hint books. So there's a whole part of what you could think of as rich education that we've known over the last few hundred years that doesn't fit well into gaming and simulation at the present. You could imagine doing much richer things in the future. So there's the famous saying that'll probably go on my tombstone is the best way to predict the future is to invent it. But the surest way to predict the future is to prevent it. So the simplest future and this is the difference between new and news. So the simplest future to predict and be right at 90% of the time is it's going to be a heck of a lot like today. So if you go back in computing and take a look at the advent of commercial personal computers in the early 80s, what's happened is they've gotten faster and they've gotten more resolution. They finally got hooked up to the internet, but the internet was started in the late 60s, so it was already around. And So what's happened is much more of a kind of a consolidation and a commercialization of ideas rather than new ideas. It's very hard to find an actual new idea between 1980 and now, because everybody's energy has been taken up in dealing with the ideas of the 60s and the 70s. There's two things here. One of the things which I'm partly guilty of, but more in the realm of, I take more responsibility in the realm of kids, is that the general user interface, the GUI interface idea, was developed by several of, I was one of the main guys, and Nicholas Negroponte's group at MIT, colleagues, and but basically the idea was to try and make something that was relatively that was news instead of new. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to use the children's available brain cells for learning something difficult, like we were interested in how could we teach 10-year-olds a version of calculus, and we found out how to do that. So we wanted the user interface to be very simple. So we made a tricycle that was very easy for people to ride, and of course adults took to the tricycle also. But the problem is it's not a bike, and it could be a bike. And so immersive environments people love because, and the tendency for them to make the immersive environments is as much like the regular world that people are in as possible. And if you think about it, it's kind of, that is using a lot of computing power for something you've already got. So, and the affordances in this world are usually made to be relatively natural. But I point out that to anybody who's ever learned a musical instrument, there's nothing less natural than a musical instrument. That's the whole point of a musical instrument. Is the reason they take so long to play is they allow you to do things that you can't do in a natural way. You can play polyphony on a piano. You can produce expressions that the human voice can't express, and it takes some real effort. And so in this area of user interface, the big conflict is between the kazoo, which is learnable in a few minutes, and the violin, which is learnable in a few years. And the short-term payoffs are completely different, and so are the long-term payoffs. So that's the first thing people have to get in their head. Whether they're going to do immersive environments, it doesn't matter. For any kind of user interface, they have to decide what the learning curve should be on the user interface, and can they make a user interface that's really going to pay off in efficiency if a couple of years down the road. So then the second part is what is the use of what are you using the immersion for? And this, I think, most people have just missed it. I think the best ones are still things that are essentially like flight simulators. When I was a navigator in the Air Force, I trained on a flight simulator that didn't have any computer at the other end. It was half a football field of models, and it had a periscope crane. So when you were doing the flight simulator, you were actually driving a periscope camera around on this model, and it was really cheap. It was really good. You could really learn how to navigate, and they had zillions of those back then. And so that was a good idea. So things that are like flight simulators, I think, are tremendously useful because people are making an effort to give you situations in a relatively safer way for learning really hard things. You spend a lot of time in them. I think the meeting ones are generally bad because they have to be done just infinitely better in almost every way. I've never seen a good meeting one. And one of the best ones I've ever seen is one that we did, actually. There was a spin-off of our lab and as a Silicon Valley startup. And for learning, it's still not good enough.